Thank you, everyone. My name is Deon Nel. I'm with the Global Resilience Partnership. And in the end of the day, I've decided to go with a story that is deeply personal to me and perhaps would be better told by Mayor Patricia de Lille, but I will have a go at it nevertheless. And my story is about the transition of South Africa and growing up in that country. So in the mid-1980s, growing up in what was then the biggest social, I think, and economic transition that we have seen within a country in our recent modern history. In 1986, South Africa was in a state of emergency, and it seemed that we were further away from a transition than we ever were, further away from a free and fair South Africa than we ever were. In 1988, it was a very low point for myself. My political naivety was completely in tatters, and the world seemed like a very divided and hateful place at that time. And yet suddenly, things started changing. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. 1991, the country voted to repeal the apartheid legislation. In 1994, we had our first elections, and Nelson Mandela was elected as the president of the country. So the change happened so quickly. And I often reflect now as I'm doing my work and using systems approaches to try and drive a more resilient future. You know, what can we learn from that transition, and what can we learn about systems transitions? And so here are three lessons that I've drawn from this. The first lesson is that what you see at the surface can be deceiving. Whilst the political situation in 1987 was more dire than it had ever been before, the undercurrents and things that were happening under the surface were very, very different. Grassroots civil society, social movements were taking greater influence, having greater impact, and being more organized and more mobilized. The private and financial sector was starting to systematically divest out of South Africa, cutting off the resources that supported the apartheid regime. My second lesson is that large-scale change never happens smoothly. In fact, the system becomes more volatile the closer you get to that point of change. What we were experiencing in 1987 was the dying throes of a dying regime who were willing to risk everything because they had absolutely everything to lose. My third lesson is that when change happens, it happens very quickly. If you had told me in 1988 that in 3 years' time Nelson Mandela would be free, I would have told you that you were crazy. But it happened. And so there are many parallels, I think, in this transition, this political and social transition, and what's required for a just transition to a zero carbon emission society, not least because of the equity issues mentioned by the Prime Minister of Barbados. And I offer these three simple contributions. We should not be distracted by the political noise that we're hearing. Under the surface, we are seeing the real change. Civil society movements are becoming more mobilized and calling for a resilient future. Business leaders like we have around sitting with us today, investors, governors, mayors are taking real actions that are leading to real change. And secondly, I think we should be prepared for high levels of volatility in this change period. The powers that have locked themselves into a fossil fuel industry world have everything to lose, and they will risk everything at this time. So we need to build resilience at this time of change, because things will become bumpy. And finally, I would just say that we should take hope that when change happens, it can happen a lot faster than we ever imagine. I'm very optimistic that we can make this change, and I draw inspiration from the words of Nelson Mandela, which I'm sure you've all heard, that it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you.